Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Bryan. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
This is the second installment of a three-part series for the man who wants to inspect his relationship with alcohol. Now, alcohol is an area of life where you can really drift if you don't bring some intentionality to it. So in the first episode, we interviewed Pete Sousa, a TV news anchor and ESPN play-by-play sports analyst who hit rock bottom through alcohol abuse. He had to enter AA and then had to rebuild his entire life in his early 30s. And he did so amazingly. Now, that was a look into the extreme and devastating effects of addictive alcohol abuse. Now, even though Bryan and I, and most likely you, have never had an addictive relationship with alcohol, through listening to Pete's story, we could sure as hell see how we'd used booze to mask insecurities, to numb our fears, and quite frankly, just to fit in. But I've been alcohol-free for about 6 years now, and guys, I'm never going back. There was never a moment where I really declared that I'm not drinking anymore. It just kind of faded out of my life the more and more intentional I got. And, the less and less alcohol aligned with where I was going. Bryan still drinks socially, but far less regularly than he did even just a few years ago. And so we thought that we'd explore this conversation of rethinking alcohol. What is life like after alcohol? So in this episode, we talk about what an alcohol-free life could look like for you. The friction that you might experience when curtailing your drinking, and the people who are going to push back on that, the relationships that you may anticipate changing as a result of it, how to build a vibrant and fun social life without needing social lubrication. I think one of most people's fears about giving up alcohol or changing your drinking habits is that life is just going to be boring now. And that's a big falsity, as I found in my life. And then the impact on your body of going alcohol-free. And I don't even need to spoil that one. I mean, the effects that alcohol has on your physical well-being, your sleep, et cetera, the eating habits. So I'll share with you my personal experience of what happened with my body after going alcohol-free. So let's get into this episode. Rethinking Alcohol Part 2, Life After Alcohol, Boring or Thriving? All right, buddy, this is a continuation of the conversation that we had in our last episode with Pete Sousa about alcohol. And his story was one of hitting rock bottom. What we didn't have a chance to get into in the episode was, what did life look like for him after alcohol? And so we thought that we wanted to record this episode on what does life look like after alcohol, because I've personally, over the last 5 or 6 years, chosen to remove alcohol from my life by and large part. I never had a drinking problem. It wasn't something that, bottom that I hit or any troublesome behavior, but it just slowly phased its way out of my life. And I think a lot of people are curious about how do you socialize without alcohol? And I know that you have a social life primarily without alcohol. That could be really interesting to our listeners who are maybe considering that as well.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey because questions that I had asked myself before, and this is going back to college and maybe post-college days, like, if I wasn't drinking, what would I be doing right now?
Right. Right.
And here I am drinking less. And to be clear, I haven't like purposefully or consciously said like I'm done with alcohol. I just happen to have it a lot less. So I'm living in that state now, and I've continued to ask myself that question of, okay, like, what do I do here? Like, I'm so used to meeting people up for a drink or like letting that be the setting in which I connect with people. And if I'm being totally honest, I miss that. I miss that sort of connective sort of feel. And so I'll be really curious to hear from you on what are you doing now that you're not drinking as much or at all.
Cool. We'll swap some stories on that. And before we do, we had some heartbreaking news this week in the Great Man Within community. For the first time in the 2 years that we've been running these masterminds, there's 3 of them, 3 different masterminds. We lost a brother, Joshua Kelly, who is a beloved member of the digital mastermind, 35 years old, been battling cancer for 4 years, had gone into remission, but it came back in a really, really brutal way over the last 5 or 6 months, ended up losing his life just a few days ago. Joshua was many things. He's a devoted father, leaving behind a beautiful 4-year-old daughter who's the love of his life, Adeline, an endurance athlete, a poet, and a truth seeker. He was, as a lot of the guys described to him in the remembrance that we had of him the other night, the heart and soul of the digital mastermind. And one of the amazing things about this man, Bryan, I know you didn't get a chance to know him, is that, he was going through some really difficult times. He physically lost his ability to compete and perform, which was something that was central to his life. He was an endurance athlete. He lost his job. His marriage fell apart, ended up separating from his wife. There's a lot of things in his personal life that were not going well. And yet he was always the first guy to show up for every challenge, right? To sign up for every challenge that we were doing. He was the first guy to comment on all the brothers' social media posts to show love and support. He was constantly giving gratitude. He was the guy who set the standard and the tone for what it was like to show up and do the work. And I want to read a poem that he had written 3 weeks before he left this earth that gives you a sense. And this is almost like a great man poem, like it's almost writing about his great man within. This could be called the Great Man Within poem that just shows the testament of his character, even when his physical body and everything around him was failing. So here's Joshua Kelly. I met someone new. I met someone new today, a man of quiet confidence, a leader who leads with love in his heart, a true encourager. I met someone who seeks to impart wisdom, takes steps in spite of fear, an enriched spirit, a man with strong character. I met someone who's learned to quiet the unnecessary doubt, to overcome distrust, who removes his ego, and he who has become free. A man who allows himself to show up, who doesn't hold back. He digs in with faith when the chips are down. A man who takes time to understand the needs of those he loves, embraces growth in all its forms. I met someone new today, a man with courage who gives freely, listens with intent, and never shies from admitting his faults. Instead, he uses them as opportunities to grow and evolve. A man who holds qualities that seek to uplift, to provide safe spaces, honest and true, who views life as that which is meant to be lived in the spirit of passion and togetherness. Today, I met someone new. Tomorrow, when he greets me in the mirror, he will make things more clear. Each day, he will grow in me, so that man can be here for you. Joshua D. Kelly.
Tom, when you read that for the first time last night, my first thought was like, man, that guy is free. And not just because he's not here on earth anymore, but for someone to reach that state of recognition where he's not afraid to show up in whatever form he's in. A guy that was living he had all the hallmarks of what would cause somebody to be depressed.
Yep.
Had every reason to not do anything, to not show up. And he was yet the first one to show up, living free. And it wasn't just a poem that he wrote, right? Everything I've heard about this guy, he did show up like that. And I've seen his posts and he's commented on a few of my things too. And he's just, man, like, it made me think about where I'm showing up and how I'm showing up.
He did that with everybody. There are 3 remembrances that we had across the 3 different masterminds this past week. Everyone said the same thing. No one loved this community more than Josh. We all loved him. And it just goes to show, and he sent me a direct message, a week before his passing. And it looked like in reading the message, he knew that his time was near. And he said, just how much he loved the guys in this group and his ability to leave with such acceptance, to leave this earth with so much like acceptance and love in his heart, had in large part to do with being in this group and, feeling so much love and support from the brothers. So, he will be remembered. We're talking about maybe we have a scholarship fund in his name, but we're certainly going to keep his memory alive.
One thing, Dominic, that I saw in that note that he wrote you, he talked about, like brothers in this life and beyond. I don't know if those are the exact words that he used, but it brought up a lot of questions for me in terms of like what we do here on earth. Does that translate after earth? And he seemed to be a guy that was, at that precipice of in between here and there, and had a belief like I know a lot of people do, where like this isn't just a for now thing. And when we look at the community that we've built here and how much fun we have like while we're on earth, it gives me a lot of hope and brings a smile to my face that like this isn't just for now, and it is beyond. And maybe Josh is one of the first ones there.
Yeah, he's the first one at the party, keeping the seats warm for us. Can't wait to see you, buddy. Well, I can wait. I can wait to see you. But I'll tell you what, and I think the way that this really relates beautifully to the conversation we're about to have today is, Joshua would have given anything to have a few more breaths on this earth, right? And to spend that time with Adeline, to do the mundane stuff like, doing your errands, to, feel his body again, take a bike ride. And so it begs the question of how intentionally are we living our lives? Those of us who are still able to breathe, who are still able to make conscious choices, who have people in our lives that we love and care about. I know for many people who are, grappling with their relationship with alcohol, you can have an ambivalent relationship with it where it provides this, wonderful social lubrication. It gives you a reason to gather and let down some of your inhibitions. I know a part of your story, which you'll share in a few moments, is it was the thing that allowed you to have sex and feel confident having sex for many years of your life. But at the same time, the bill you have to pay for drinking regarding the hangovers, the clouded mind, the sluggishness, the missing of your weekends because you're just kind of, dragging ass around, and the food that you end up eating and the downstream effects of that, it starts to beg the question of, is the price of admission worth it? I'll quickly kind of share where I'm at in my life, and then Bryan, I'll pause and see where you're at. So for the last 4 or 5 years, I've probably not had more than like 5 to 10 drinks in any given year, like in the year. And I never made a conscious decision to say, I'm going to stop drinking. It was never like that. It just kind of slowly phased its way out of importance of my life. And I can trace this back to almost like 10 years ago where that process started, maybe even a little longer. I go to the Equinox fitness studio here in New York City. I started taking these fitness classes back before it was like cool for guys to, like, guys were still kind of like, you're supposed to be on the weight floor. I started going into these classes. I loved the classes I was taking. I was surrounded by beautiful women all the time in New York City. I'm like, what am I missing here, guys? Like, why aren't more men in here? And the class that I used to go to at noon on a Saturday ended up getting moved to like 10 a.m. And when I was going out on Friday nights and trying to get to that class on Saturday morning at 10 a.m., I would miss it. I would feel like shit the entire day, or I would go to the class. I'd feel so crappy and it would be really hard. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stop going out on Friday nights in that way. I'd go on dates or whatever, hang out with some friends. But a lot of those Friday nights, I just kind of like chilled out and did some introspective stuff. I'd go to the workout on Saturday. I'd feel like $1 million all day on Saturday, which was something that I had not felt since I started drinking, like decades. And I'm like, this is what a Saturday could feel like. I could hang out with friends. I could read. I could work out longer. I could, whatever. And then I would go out on Saturday night. I would get drunk. And then on Sunday, I would feel the contrast of how shitty I would feel compared to that Saturday. And as my life started getting more, I don't know, I could say I felt important. I was getting, I was dialed into work. I had a bigger responsibility in the office. I started having like more creative endeavors, like wanting to read books and start like my side business. I just couldn't see how living a high performance lifestyle and alcohol just didn't really seem to fit in. So it just slowly faded its way out of my life.
And the moments that you do have a drink, Dom, and I don't know when the last time you had a drink is, like, what are they? Do you still do it at all? Do you tell people like, I don't drink alcohol anymore? Like, what's your, like, give me your social alcohol scenario currently.
Yeah. I mean, like if I'll go to a wedding, I might have a glass of wine or two and just, enjoy it at dinner. If I'm on a date or if I'm with a friend and they want to have a drink and I'm like, yeah, I'll have a drink. Just so you know, I'm probably going to have this one drink and it's not going to be like 2 or 3 drinks because I'm just not into that. Even a little bit of that does fuck with my sleep. Like we hear all the guys who talk about this in the mastermind, like if you're smiling, like everyone in our group has got either an Oura Ring or a Whoop band. We're all measuring our sleep and our recovery. And there's just no mistaking. even when you think you've gotten a good night's sleep, even when you fall asleep quickly, your quality of sleep is dog shit for the most part. I think like 99% of people have a really shitty night's sleep quality wise when they're drinking. So when I got all that information, I'm like, why would I have even 2 drinks? I love being in tune. I love being alive. I love being conscious. And the more we've done this work, Bri, and we can feel our feelings, and I'm confident walking into situations. I love being alert. For me, like the purpose that alcohol served in my life of feeling confident and of loosening up, I no longer need it.
Yeah, I think that's the big one. You should put a warning label on this podcast or any of the work that we do that says like, doing this work may lead you to the conclusion that alcohol isn't doing what it used to for you, because this will. Like, it should be a Surgeon General's warning label that states that we are bad for the alcohol business, because you'll end up drinking less automatically. But let's give alcohol its due. Right. And you mentioned some of the virtues that alcohol has brought to me personally, and you know, the confidence and socialization for you. Pete talked on the podcast about like him feeling like a superhero, right, when he was on the stuff. And at the age of maybe 18, 19, when I started drinking, gosh, like there are so many things going on in life at that point. All these changes, hormonal changes, school changes, relational changes. And so to get a sip of something that made me feel like I could handle all that shit was amazing, right? I could say the things that I always wanted to say. I could act crazy and not feel weird about the consequences. Like my freshman year at college, I remember I went to the University of Iowa, a big drinking culture, like I know a lot of colleges do. I was there for a football game. My parents came. It was parents' weekend, and they came. They had never seen me drink before, and I didn't really drink, but like hardly at all in high school. And I'll never forget. I didn't like beer for one, and so I only liked hard alcohol.
Mike's Hard Lemonade.
Mike's Hard Lemonade was a kind of a okay in between, but you can only have so much of that stuff. even at the ripe age of like 20 years old, like you're not drinking a lot of Mike's Hard Lemonade.
No.
But what I did is I also didn't want to get caught in the dorms drinking, and so I bought a Camelback, and I used to take ice cubes and mix like orange juice and vodka, and like I would have this giant Camelback at the tailgate. And I'd be drinking out of it. I'd be giving it to other people pre-COVID. And like it was kind of like the life of the party. And I remember my parents had
So that's how mouth herpes spreads.
That's how you get herpes. Drinking out of some random guy's Camelback. But it made me feel like the life of the party. My parents had a conversation with me afterwards, like, hey, we're a little worried about you. You were kind of acting a little crazy yesterday. And in my mind, I'm like, I was awesome yesterday. Right? Like,
yeah.
I could do magical things like dance at a club when I'm drinking alcohol. So like alcohol really served a purpose for my life. But what I couldn't feel then is, what was the cost of admission? Like, what was the price I was paying? Because feeling hungover or staying in bed until noon wasn't that big of a deal.
Let's hit that real quick. Because like in that part of your life, the equation, the price of admission was worth like the benefits that you got. Because you have all the time in the world when you're in college. You can hang around and be hungover all day, and you're probably your body feels pretty resilient. And so that equation works at that time in your life. And Pete Sousa last week, when he talked about it, when he first started drinking, he felt like a superhero. That equation worked. And then over time, the switch flipped for him dramatically, right? Into a place where like he was really, on the path to maybe losing his life. For you, where did the price of admission start to shift, where you're kind of like, I'm not getting the same kind of payoff that I once was? And it started to affect your, the volume that you drank.
One of the most interesting parts of that podcast with Pete, I thought, was when he talked about after he stopped drinking and taking other substances, how he kind of had to start over and learn how to do life again. He talked about working, I think it was at a KFC maybe, because he had never had to face the emotions before of not knowing how to do something and feeling incompetent, of starting a conversation with a woman or being intimate with someone, right? And so he had to like start over. I remember the first moment for me, which was back in 2016. I was sitting at an event for Bryan and I's podcast, The Future of Sex. And she had a guest. It was a live recording. She had a guest on that was talking about sex parties. And I'd never been to a sex party. And she was describing like what the sex party was like, the programming, the safety, and the sexual health. That's why I was there, because I was running the sexual health company. And then she said, and there's no substances. There's no alcohol, there's no drugs or anything, because we don't want people getting out of control. We want them to be fully conscious. We want them to be asking questions like, do you consent? Right. And so
That's right.
Alcohol and other substances may make somebody not do that. And I remember this feeling of fear that set in of like, a sex party sounds cool and sounds fun, but wait a second, no alcohol? Are you insane?
Right.
That sounds terrible. That sounds frightening. I'm not even sure if I could get it up. Like, would I need to? I don't know. Do you walk around with a hard penis at a party, or is that weird? I don't really know. I don't know the rules here. But the idea of being intimate with one person, let alone like multiple people being around naked without alcohol, without that filter, terrified me. And so that was the first time I started asking questions like, wait a second, like what have I been reliant on alcohol for? And so I continued that question. Now, I didn't go to a sex party and do it without alcohol. I haven't like kind of tested that boundary. But I noticed that I also use alcohol to feel more social. Like if I go to a bar, right? What do? You drink alcohol, you talk to people, you do the whole thing. I remember going to the first party, and this is maybe a couple years later, that I decided before going there I wasn't going to drink. It was a Saturday night. And there was dancing. Now, we all know my history with dancing and how I'd love to be a great dancer, but I'm an absolutely awful dancer with zero rhythm, right? But everybody else there was drinking and dancing and everything else. And I said, okay, I'm going to go on the dance floor sober. And I got to tell you, I felt super awkward. Talking to people, dancing for 45 minutes. I felt atrocious. I wanted to leave about every 30 seconds.
That's Pete's equivalent of having to learn all over again, like, going to KFC and working. And then he told the story of like the first time he kissed a woman sober. He was like, I'm going to kiss you now. And then leaned in for the kiss. Yes. Like, he didn't know, he had no idea how to do it.
Here comes the kiss. I'm going to do it. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And it's so awkward. But I stayed in it because I was like, okay, like my commitment to myself was to not drink and feel whatever came up. So that's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. And God, this feels awful. Like I wanted nothing more than to go have a drink. I mean, it was in the other room. Like just go get a drink, Bryan. Like come and enjoy, talk to this new woman that you're talking to, and then go home. Right. Well, I stuck it out. I stayed on the dance floor for about 45 minutes and then I got out of there. I left earlier. Now,
it's awesome.
Now, what was my behavior usually? If I would go to a party, I'd be the last one there. I'd be there at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., like getting after it. Right. I think I left at maybe 10:30, 11, something like that.
And then you would have had a box of insomnia cookies afterwards.
I pounded the cookies when I got home. But like what shook loose for me in that experience is I was like, oh, interesting. Like now I know that I can go to a bar, I can go to an event where other people are drinking and I don't. And it didn't feel good, but I know I can do it. I know I can get through it. Now, logically, that makes sense. As I talk here on the podcast, experience it is a whole different ballgame. And what I realized is that my life was actually constricted by alcohol because I was just uncomfortable. Alcohol was something I was using so I could be comfortable in a more narrow set of experiences.
Isn't that interesting? Because when you first start drinking alcohol, it's kind of like alcohol allows you to expand the things you can do. And then at a certain point, it starts constricting. I think that's a really critical point in someone reflecting on their lives. Is alcohol keeping me from having other kinds of experiences now? If alcohol is still expansive, right? If it's still something that's like, you get invited to social events or it feels like you're meeting lots of people that like you truly want in your life that are aligned with the kind of person you want to be and whatever else that means. Does it feel expansive or did it start to feel like what you just talked about, which is like, man, I can't dance without it. I have to do, I only go out on these Friday, Saturday nights. I only see these people. That's a great turning point.
And so where I can operate in life with experiences is now broader without alcohol. So I can do more. And I noticed something that I had never noticed before after going to a party. Number one, the next day I felt great, like you described in your experience. But even more importantly, I remembered the conversations I had. I remembered the woman's name who I was talking to. I remembered to follow up with people that we were having interesting conversations with before, which led to other new and exciting relationships. And so I was like, oh, wow, like how many drunk conversations have I had in the past over my 20 plus years of drinking where like there could have been a connection made and I don't remember any of it. Everything was numb, right? And so that numbness expanded what I could do to begin with. But what I didn't realize is what it was taking away. And so I'm going to fast forward to something that happened to me recently because as I said, most of the time I'm not drinking alcohol. I may have a drink here or there with Becca or with a couple of friends, but recently we got together for a friend's 40th birthday party. And I mean, this is a few months ago. This is a group I always drink with, had a good time. And I told myself going into it, I'm going to have a few drinks, like no problem whatsoever. Now, what I didn't realize, rookie mistake here, is after you don't drink for a while, your tolerance goes down.
It's embarrassing. Like you'll feel a buzz after. Well, I feel a buzz like after like a beer and a half.
Oh my gosh! And again, I'm still not a huge beer fan, so I decided to just drink straight tequila. And because I like tequila.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so I was drinking a little tequila. I was very responsible. I was also drinking water. By the end of the night, like I don't know exactly how many I had, but people were standing up and giving speeches for his birthday party, talking about what a great guy he is and everything else. And I wasn't asked to give a speech, but I was like, hey, I know this guy pretty well. Like, I want to give a speech. So I kind of raised my hand. I'm like, I haven't gone yet. Like, let me in.
And they're like,
So I stand up, I look at the crowd. And again, this is all my friends. This is not like a high pressure situation, right? I look at everybody and I had the thoughts in my head of what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get them out. And I was like, wait a second. Like one of those experiences that I've had in my life over the last several years of drinking less was being able to speak from my heart, being able to speak from my intuition, not having to prepare a bunch of stuff, and instead just sitting here doing what we do on the podcast and saying, this is where I'm at, and I'm okay with that. And dude, I was completely shut down. I couldn't access those feelings. I couldn't access like my heart and what I really wanted to say about this guy that I love so much. And I basically just said like, and one of the guys even, he's like, just speak from your heart. I'm like, I can't feel it. And so I just said like, sorry, happy birthday. And I sat back down.
That was your contribution?
That was my contribution. It was embarrassing. And more importantly, the next day, I'm like, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
What? Like, fuck this drinking stuff. That sucked. Yeah. Like, it didn't do anything for me. I didn't connect with people. Like, I didn't need it. It didn't do anything for me. And so I think, like, there's this in-between of wanting to experience more, wanting to be able to speak from my heart, wanting to feel comfortable in more places without alcohol so I can experience more of life. And I think the big number two, and you mentioned this, Dominic, when you were talking about your experience, is that I have a higher purpose in life. There's something that I want to be doing instead of being hungover or not feeling good, or I need to be on my game because I'm excited about my life. And it's the same thing that gets me up in the morning, right? It's not just the alcohol thing, but like, so I think there's this combination of wanting to experience more and feel more and knowing that I can, and this like purpose-driven life that excites me about living.
Yeah, that's great stuff, man. And it's such a funny story because like you're one of the few guys who could be tapped at any moment to give a spontaneous speech because you do have access to your heart and you're exceptional at it. I've seen you do it a gazillion times. So to hear that like you were without words in this particular environment just goes to show it's like, okay, you know, this substance in that way, it just doesn't belong with you. And, you know, I think one of the big fears that a lot of people have when they're contemplating, like, do I start to dial back alcohol or remove it from my life for a period of time is like, am I just going to become boring?
Totally.
Is life going to become boring? Yeah. And, you know, like, let's be honest, there is a transition period around this stuff. You know, for most people, I know for me, what it caused me to do was really reinvent my social circle. You know, like the people I was hanging out, it was interesting, like where I was in this period of time in my life where all of my best friends from childhood and from college had moved out of the city. They got married. They were having kids. They were starting their own lives. I didn't really have a group of friends that I could call my own. I ended up kind of connecting with this New York City socialites who are going out and partying and like wanting to be in all the cool places. And I never really fit in with that. And I was never really vibing with, but I had nothing else. And so we were drinking a lot. And when I started to kind of like, you know, fade away from that group and fade away from the drinking, for a period of time, my Friday and Saturday nights were pretty boring. I didn't have like something that replaced the thing. But just as I've recognized in almost every area of life, when I have transitioned out of the way I've always done something, there's very rarely like a smooth, like, boom, this next thing appears. We kind of need that, right? That transition. It's like the hero's journey, right? You break from ordinary reality, you go into the abyss. Part of you is shattered. Your identity is, you know, dissolving, and then you figure out who you want to be. And then it reconstitutes as someone like the next version of yourself. So the way that started to happen for me was like, all of a sudden I started spending more time like working out or going to yoga classes or going to workshops around personal development. And then what starts happening as I start forging relationships with people who have a lot in common with my most important values and interests, which was very different than the social people I was hanging out with. So now, like, instead of going out and getting hammered, I'm going to dinners with like small groups of people who talk about interesting shit, the stuff that like I, do all day long. Or we're now going to Daybreaker, the sober dance party, right? Which we could never contemplate doing. I ended up going to those sex parties that you're talking about. Like, I didn't participate in this. Like, I watched and I enjoyed, like, I was able to go and kind of have that experience, but I was blown away. Like, just like you talked about, that this was a party where everyone was sober and substance free. And if you think about how many people who pass judgment on sex parties, but they're going and getting fucking annihilated and don't even remember their names or the names of the person that they're having sex with, and because that's what they need to do in order to feel comfortable. Like, you may want to look in the mirror, because these people are fully conscious and aware and seeking consent. And the women were dressed in such beautiful, sexy attire because they felt safe, and their sexuality was so available because they felt safe in this space where guys like knew the boundaries.
Yeah, those are the experiences that are available, right? Like where we don't have to like be this uncontrolled, in air quotes, fun sort of person in order to experience these things. As a matter of fact, again, it reduces our scope of what we can do.
It reduces, and you and I, and maybe to kind of put a cherry on top of this, like where life was after alcohol for me, is it took me a while to rebuild my relationships, right? But then that's where you came along. That's where like the guys in our men's group, like Mark and other guys, that's where those guys started to come along. From shortly thereafter, this whole community, came as a result. So this all happened in the last like 5 or 6 years. And one of the things that you and I got invited to 2 years ago, was this party called Wild Vessel. And it was an invite only, handpicked by a woman who created this like exclusive party of 80 people. I think it's like 50 women, 30 guys, substance free. And it was a space for like women to feel open and free to dance, to be sexual. They wore these incredibly gorgeous and sexy outfits. And we got exposure to that, and we were allowed to go to that because we were trustworthy guys, right? Who were sober, who were conscious around emotions. And women will keep telling us all the time. They're like, if you guys weren't such fucking idiots and ogling and drunk and hitting on and making us feel, we would walk around like this all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
All the time. And you guys would get so much better sex. You get so much better connection. But because there's so many of you guys who are just like unwilling to do that. So anyway, that's what life after alcohol looked like for me.
Are there moments for you, Dom, that still exist that you're like, man, like I kind of want to have a drink here? Or is that gone?
Like
completely gone?
Never.
Completely gone?
Never.
Yeah. I'm still in that transition period where sometimes I'm at home at night. I'm like, man, like I kind of, like I'd like to connect with this person or go do something or what have you, And I'm like, well, what else is there? It's like 9:30 at night. Like, what are we going to go do? Like, I'm not going to go like,
sure.
And so I think I haven't quite figured out what that, like you mentioned yoga, what else did you mention? Like personal development workshops, right? Some of these other things.
Yeah. Workouts,
Workouts, right. Exactly. So I feel like I haven't quite filled up my bucket of like other things that I do. But I will say that is starting, right? Whether it's the woodworking shop that I've got here in my garage
Sure.
or getting back into the gym and working out. One of the interesting experiments I had with alcohol about a little over 3 years ago now is I stopped including alcohol on my dates. And so for years I'd gone on first, second, third dates, whatever, like, and alcohol was, I would say, primary. It was central to the interaction. And I realized that wasn't leading to the best outcomes. And so I made 2 rules for myself. Number 1 is that no sex, no intimacy, I should say, on the first date. That was like one rule. I put that rule in pretty early when I moved to New York. The second thing I did later was like no alcohol. We're going to meet up in the daytime, and we're going to meet up with tea, coffee, a walk in the park, or something else that wasn't alcohol related. That was one of the best things I did, because again, I could remember all the conversations. I could like really connect with the person, and there was no expectation that alcohol sometimes brings related to intimacy or the next thing or making bad decisions or whatever. And so that was an area of my life where I really started to meet some high quality people. And I stopped hanging out with people that I didn't want to hang out with because I remembered like, this isn't where I want to be right now.
I went on a date this past weekend with a woman who she was, someone who followed me on Instagram, and we, started DMing, and we'd had like an afternoon date. So we went to Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and we got together. I think we got together at like 10:30 in the morning, and we went to a coffee shop, and then we walked over to the park, and, we sat down for a few hours and talked. I think we hung out for like 3.5 hours, completely sober. It was amazing. She was awesome. We have a great connection. And so it can be that simple. And I know there's a lot of guys who are like, well, I've been judged in the past by women who don't, I remember 7 years ago, maybe this is 8 years ago, I started the new year doing 100 days off of alcohol. This was back when I was still drinking quite a bit, 100 days off alcohol. And I was trying to date. And I went on a few dates with women, kind of the traditional way, like either, mostly dinner dates. And when it would be time to order a drink, they would just expect to have a drink. And I'm like, oh, I'm not having one. And they thought, are you an alcoholic? Is there a problem? Or I'm like, no, you're more than welcome to have a drink. I'm just doing this thing. And then she's like, oh, you're killing the vibe. And then there's like that social pressure. And I'm just like, a few things are, if that's how she feels, like that I'm killing the vibe because I'm making a sovereign choice as a human being, we're not going to vibe, period. Because there's going to be, if you can't respect what I'm doing and can't celebrate what I'm doing for these very intentional reasons, and it's somehow, fucking with you, then we have fundamental differences about how we live our lives. And that was a very quick and easy way for me to be like, thank you. This is nice. We're never going to see each other again.
Totally fair. And I've been the guy that did that exact same thing with other people. It's like, come on, man, like have a drink. Because that's the only way I know that we can have fun together and be on the same page. Otherwise, like I'm doing my thing. I'm not sure if you're with me. Right. And that's like really what they're saying. So I do understand that. And also, again, warning label, this work may come with wanting to drink less alcohol. Right.
That's right. Yeah. And so I think maybe to kind of bring this thing to a close is, listen, and I want to be very clear about this. I probably should have said this at the very beginning. I've got no judgment at all whatsoever around anyone who drinks. And if it's a part of your lifestyle that you enjoy. Like a lot of the guys in our mastermind love having drinks and they love, the social aspect of that. And I'm thrilled for them for that. It's my choice, right? We all get to make individual choices of how we want to incorporate things into our lives. I happen to do more psychedelics than most of the guys in the group who drink, and they're totally cool with that. So there's no judgment whatsoever. For me, it feels good. And the one thing we didn't really talk about, but I'll just hit this in a high note, my body never looked better.
Your body does look great. Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
I mean, and I've noticed since you stopped drinking, you went from like, that guy probably works in an office and also works out. Right? He's got two places that he works, the gym and the office. And now it looks like you live at the gym. Oh, exclusively.
Well, thanks for the compliment. And, for me, it was just getting rid of all the crappy shit that was in my body. And even the, my face would be a little bit more swollen from the alcohol. And just the damage that you do to the different, organs. For me, it was just like, okay, once I got rid of that, my body really responded in a beautiful way. And I know a lot of people feel the same.
Something we were talking about before we hit the record button is how we have these practices that give us a good baseline, that put our bodies in a good state so that we can show up better for what we're doing in life. And some of that stuff is no surprise, right? It's going to bed on time. It's eating the right food. It's meditating. It's breath work, right? All these things that we talk about. And I feel like those are all the things that we do. But just like those put us in a great state, like not drinking alcohol typically leads to better sleep, better food that you're going to put in your body, right? Like, and so it's one of those like high leverage activities that my encouragement for anybody that is in, like, let's just say a routine or has certain beliefs around alcohol. Like I go on vacation, so I drink, right? It's a Saturday, so I drink, right? Just because we always have, that's what we've always done. Like my encouragement is to like look at those vestigial beliefs and say, like, you know what? Like, let me experiment. Let me do 100 days like Dominic did. Or maybe like, let's just do a weekend. Or let me just go to one party and not drink and see what happens. Because that's the only real way to experiment with these experiences that we're talking about.
Great stuff, man. I really enjoyed the convo today. And in our third and final episode, which is going to be airing next week, is a conversation with James Swanwick, who runs a program called Project 90, which helps people who are non-alcoholics who are looking to get off alcohol in a 90-day group coaching program. And we've had 3 men in our mastermind who have gone through a 90-day, one of these programs. 2 of them went through James's program, and their lives really exploded after they removed alcohol from their lives.
Exploded how?
Like they started, all of them started making more money at work.
Okay.
All of them, their bodies got better. They started having better sex with their partners. I mean,
those are 3 pretty great things.
They were pretty great things. And Swanwick James, who's a buddy of mine, he does the Swanee glasses, those blue blocking glasses that you see a lot of our guys wearing. He's pretty intense about like his hatred for alcohol. So take that for a grain of salt. Like he's got a lot of judgy attitude towards alcohol. He calls it attractively packaged poison.
That's fair. So, he's chemically correct.
Yeah, he's chemically not inaccurate. Yeah. But, like you may bristle at some of that intensity, but what the work that they're doing there, and for the people who they're ready for it, it's a really compelling program. So take a listen to that episode next week. I hope you guys are enjoying the series so far. And Bryan, great talking to you today, bud.
See you, buddy.
Hey, Bryan and I wanted to thank you for the ratings and reviews that you leave us. We read every single one of them, and they're so helpful in helping us to understand what resonates with you and helps us determine which topics that we use in the future. So if you found this episode to be of particular value to you, will you please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts so that we know that this is the kind of topic you want to hear more about? And it also helps other prospective listeners to figure out where they can dive in first. Thank you.